Okay, I have started the recording, and then we can begin. So I hope you guys have all don't have load shedding, because that's the other problem that we're all facing. But I know my load shedding, my power's going off at 8 o'clock this evening, so hopefully I'll be able to get finished and get something sorted out to eat before the power disappears for the rest of the evening. Okay, guys, welcome, and let's get started. I'm going to grab my mark sheet here. All right, so this evening, I think I told you in the last collab that we were going to have that this evening. What we would be looking at is going over the memo and the answers and the feedback for your second assignment. Did they release the marks for your second assignment to you guys yet? Have your marks been released for the second your assignment too? I know we are under sort of pressure. Not yet. Okay, so if they're not released yet, they will be tomorrow. I don't want to put my head on a block, but I'm pretty sure they will be tomorrow, because they have been marked, and the marks are with the national office. And then once the national office has got the marks, they do their check-in and verifying, and then when they're happy with everything, then they release the marks to you guys. So you'll be able to get your marked assignments and your marks, I'm sure, tomorrow. They don't usually take longer. They shouldn't be longer than that, I'm pretty sure. And then you'll be able to see for yourself where I was hoping that they would release it in time for the session, but unfortunately not. Okay, so just a quick reminder on the screen. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Instead of going there, I'm going to just share my screen, because I have to do that to get to the solutions. I can't load that on, it doesn't allow me to load it on Learn. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm now sharing my screen, and you should be able to see the assignment document on the screen now. So just a quick run through over here, just to remind you what these questions were. Hopefully you've got your question papers with you, or you've got access to them, particularly if you printed them out, which I hope you did, because honestly you'll do much better if you print them out and you can scribble and highlight and make notes on an actual physical paper when you are working on these questions. So question 1 was where you're an analyst and you had to write this report for your company, suggesting 2 shares that you are recommending because they are suitable for risk-averse clients who are looking for low-risk shares to add to the company's portfolio. So the biggest issue that I had in terms of feedback on this question from students were not following the instructions precisely as to what was required. So they wanted you to write a report. So most of you did stick to that, and your answer was in the format of a report in some form or another, which was great. About 2 shares you have selected. Okay, so you had to select 2 shares from the JSE, Johannesburg Stock Exchange. They had to be real shares, and they had to come from 2 different sectors, and then you had to motivate why you had chosen these 2 shares in terms of this criteria. Okay, this was the criteria. Risk-averse clients, and they want shares with a low risk, investment funds or shares with a low risk profile. So when you chose your shares, you had to state why those shares were low risk. What about that particular company that you had chosen made it a low risk investment? A lot of you chose really good shares, and you gave a really nice write-up about why you liked the share, but with no reference whatsoever to risk as regards that share. So you did have to make that link. Remember, this question is basically testing you on Learning Unit 3, risk and return. So you must write about risk and the theory of risk. If this is what the question is testing you on, okay? So your motivation had to clearly link to the risk profile, why you had chosen them in terms of them being low risk. Then you also had to give an explanation of the term systematic and unsystematic. So again, in your own words, explain what a systematic risk is and what an unsystematic risk is. And then also using these two shares that you had chosen, you had to explain what some systematic and unsystematic risks for your two specific companies might be. And this was a part that a lot of students missed as well. A lot of you, most of you gave these definitions of systematic and unsystematic, but then you gave no explanation for your two shares, which systematic or unsystematic risks they might individually be faced with. So you had to include all of that information in order to get these 10 marks. So what I will do for you is I will choose, there were 2 or 3 students, I would say probably maybe 3 students that had really nice answers. The way that they had laid their questions out, the way they presented the answers was really good, and they might have missed 1 or 2 minor details here or there. But what I will do is I will post those, say 2 or 3 model answers for question 1 for you in your more resources, so that you can read, you can see what we were looking for. Okay. And I think that will help you a lot when you can then go and compare how you formulated your answer for this question 1 compared to what it should have looked like and what it should have included. The memo, obviously, for that we've been given is just a very generalized instruction on how to mark the question, but it's not, there's no model answer in the memo itself. So I'll find a couple of students' answers and let you have those. Okay, so that's what we'll cover, or what the issues were in question 1, and how I'll go about showing you a model answer. Then question 2 was for 2 parts. Part A was where you had to advise whether they should go ahead and purchase the shares in this Lightning Limited, and they gave you information about this company in terms of they gave us enough information which would allow us to value the share, okay, using our share valuation formula. So what you had to do was calculate the value of the share and then compare that value that you calculated to this amount of 192 Rand, which is the current market share price for that share. So remember, our valuation will tell us what the maximum price is that we should be prepared to pay for the share, and then compare that to 192. And if 192 is more than what our valuation is calculating to be, then no, we are not going to buy the share, because the share is currently overvalued. And obviously would have been vice versa. If our valuation had have come out at more than 192, then we would have said, yes, go ahead and buy the share, because at 192 it's a bargain price. The share is actually worth more than that, given the data that we've got. So you had to obviously use the correct formula. Just get these papers sorted out. in order to do that share valuation formula, which you've got in your textbooks and is also on the formula sheet, which I'm pretty sure I've posted in your more resources as well. And I will go and show you we'll go and have a look at the answer to this question in a second. But let's just have a look at the, so that was for 25 marks, and then for 10 marks, this one, most of you got most of this question right. Using the formula for calculating the free cash flow when presented with cash flow data from a company, they just swung it around a bit, and instead of calculating the free cash flow amount, they gave us the free cash flow, and we had to solve for the net capex amount in that formula. So let's go and have a look at that question 2. Oh, okay, let's just have a look. I'll just show you how we were instructed to answer this question 1 so that you guys can see. So here you had to obviously do extra reading and research because you had to choose 2 actual shares. So again, we are always testing whether you have understood what your grasp of understanding of systematic and unsystematic risks are, and by your answer and the type of examples you've given, that allows us to identify that. So for the mark allocation, it was out of 10 marks, so 5 of the marks were for theoretical content. So your theoretical content was discussing risk theory. How do we identify risk? What is a low risk company? Excuse me. And then also identifying correctly why your shares were suitable for risk-averse clients using that risk theory. And then the other theory that you had to include was the systematic and unsystematic explanation, and then also correctly linking systematic to unsystematic risks to your 2 shares. And then application and analysis, you can see in order to get a high mark, 4 or 5 marks for that, the theory, which is the theory on risk and on risk in general and systematic and unsystematic, and context. So the context is the case study that you are given, and your case study was you are a financial analyst having to recommend 2 shares to your board, are discussed as an integrated whole. So again, some students just give me paragraphs with a reference textbook and a paragraph with the website textbook. So you can see all they're doing is they're picking bits of theory out of their textbook or off the internet and just plonking it down on the paper, and they're not weaving the theory into the case study. So you need to discuss the theory consistently as it relates to the context of the question. So the better you are able to do that, the higher your marks are going to be. So in question 2, part A, this is your, we had to do the share valuation. So we had to use the dividend growth model, variable growth, which is in your textbooks, which requires us to, for the first 5 years, which they said our dividends were going to grow at a rate of 10%, we calculated each of those first 5 years and totaled those up to get the present value for the initial 5-year period. And then using that last dividend from the 5th year over here, we multiplied it by, added 7%, which is going to be the growth from the 6th year into infinity. And we use the present value per perpetuity formula, basically was what the second part of the formula is, using 7% to then value the share into perpetuity and add those 2 amounts together, and that gives us the current value of the share given this information that we have at hand now. So the majority of you guys did get this correct. Then please don't forget, you must comment, and this comment was worth 2 marks. If you forgot the comment, then you lost 2 marks. You had to state whether they should or should not purchase the share. So because our valuation came out at a lower value than the current market price, we are then saying do not purchase the share because the share is currently overvalued. And it's also not enough if you just say don't purchase the shares overvalued. You have to explain what do you mean by overvalued. So you must say 192 is more than the maximum price that we're supposed to pay the share, or you really do have to give a proper explanation. And you can't also say don't purchase the share. You have to give a full explanation for those 2 marks. Then part B was this free cash flow. So our free cash flow formula states that we take the after-tax EBIT. So in this case, they gave us EBIT 58,150 minus 28% will give us the after-tax EBIT. We add back depreciation, so plus depreciation of 6,500. We usually, we then add back any increase in working capital or minus any decrease in working capital. So in this example, working capital decreased from 8 million to 5.6 million. So 2.4 million is then added back to the cash flow. So this is then a positive. It's we adding it back. So after tax EBIT plus depreciation plus the decrease in working capital. So it's a decrease. So it's a minus, and a minus equals a plus, if you know what I mean. 8 million minus 5.6 equals minus 2.4. So minus 2.4 equals add 2.4 million. Then this was the blank, and we had equals 28 million. So you would have gone 41,868 plus 6.5 plus 2.4 minus 28 million equals, and this is a mistake on the memo. The correct answer, where have I got this written down, is 22,768, which the majority of you guys did get that as a correct answer. Some of you had some really weird and long-winded calculations. Remember, just keep it simple. You pick the correct formula and then just put the amounts into the formula, and you'll get at least all of these workings with marks, even if your final answer was in some way or other not correct. Then our question 3 was this portfolio question, return of a portfolio question. So very important is that they have said we have got a portfolio, okay, comprising of the following combination: Pluto, Jupiter, Neptune at these percentages. So what you had to do was you had to calculate for the year 2019, what was the return for the portfolio PJN. So it had to be the portfolio's return for 2019, not Pluto's return and Jupiter's return and Neptune's return calculated separately. Okay, very important. This was not the return of a single asset. This was the expected return of a portfolio. So you had to calculate the return PJN for all 3 years add them up, divide by 3 to get the expected return, which would have been for these 15 marks. Then calculate the standard deviation using the second formula because you weren't given a probability, and then calculate the coefficient of variation. So I don't think anybody did not get these 5 marks for the coefficient of variation, because as long as you took your answer for it's which way around is it? It is theta, the standard deviation over the expected return. So the answer to 3.2 divided by 3.1, you got those 5 marks. So let's go and have a look at what your calculations should have looked like for this 3.1 and 3.2. Okay, so you'll see here we've got one line for each year. Where's my question paper so I can just read this properly? So this first 12% was asset Pluto's return for 2019, multiplied by the 60% weighting that Pluto has in the portfolio, plus minus 3%, which is, oh, hang on, okay, this is, sorry, guys, this is another error that they had. Let me just use this. This memo had some errors in it as well, which I'm still waiting for the addendum. Those 3 there were incorrect. In the memo, they included Saturn's amount where obviously it should have been PJN. So this is, this first column there is, oh, sorry, let's get this here. This first column is Pluto's. This information in the second set of brackets should be Jupiter, and the last set of brackets is Neptune. So Pluto's return multiplied by Pluto's weighting, Jupiter's return multiplied by Jupiter's weighting, Neptune's return multiplied by Neptune's weighting, added together gives you a, I'll just give you these here, that's not correct, not correct. I know it's very annoying when this happens, when the memos are wrong, but you guys wouldn't have known that. So you should have got 10.9 for 2019, 13.8 for 2020, and 2.8% for 2021 would have given you a total of 27.5%. Divided that by 3, and you should have then got your final expected average of 9.17%, which the majority of you guys did get that correct. So then obviously this column here must be 9.17 in each instance. So it is 7.3 minus 9.17 squared equals the variance. And then you add the variances up, and you should have got, over here, your answer would have been 32.51 divided by 2. And then we take the square root of the answer. Sorry, no, let me just go back there. That's 65.001, and this is the square root of 32.51, and your final answer should have been 5.7%. Again, this, most of you got that correct. There were some very strange formulas that I saw for this question, so please just make sure that you understand clearly the presentation of your answer, the difference between being asked to calculate the return for a single asset and a return for a portfolio. The only other difference with this question as well is in your textbook, some of the questions they've got where they had a a rand value as the return and not a percentage. Because they had already in this question given you the percentage return, you did not have to, as in the example in the textbook, take the rand value multiplied by the weighting and then divided by the total rand values of the return as well in order to arrive at a percentage. So just carefully have a look at how this was done, because they gave you a percentage return and not a rand value. And then our final coefficient of variation would have been 5.7 divided by the 9.17 gave us a coefficient of variation of 0.62. Okay. Lots of you got full marks for that question. So you were either going to get this correct, or if you went completely in the wrong direction, you would have had problems there. Then our last question, question 4. This one, calculate whether the proceeds from the sale of the bonds will be sufficient for him to settle his housing bond and show all formulas and workings. This thing about show all formulas and workings, guys, please. So many of you are not doing that. It's super, super important. You must show all of your workings when you are doing something. Let me just have a look here. Oh, Cameron, they should have, I thought that they might have released the results to you today. So if they didn't release them today, they should release them to you tomorrow. I'm hoping tomorrow. It just depends on how busy the results, the results department is, but should be tomorrow. And then please listen to this recording again, play it back where you can compare when you've got your marked assignment back, compare it to this and see where you went wrong. So this one over here, you had to do, they gave us the data for the bond currently when the bond was issued. In other words, at this point, the bond has still got 20 years to the maturity date. So in other words, the bond has been newly issued. There's 20 years to maturity date. Then they said Mr. Max kept the bond for 4 years and then he wanted to sell it. So if he's going to sell it after, in 4 years' time, 20, oopsie, sorry, I've got the wrong, where did I go? I keep forgetting to press that. 20 minus 4 means there will be 16 years left to the bond's maturity. So we had to do 2 valuations of the bond here. The first valuation was using the required rate of return at the start of the bond, which is 3/4 of the annual coupon rate. So you had to take the coupon rate of 16%, multiply that by 0.75 in order to get the 12% of the coupon rate. And then in 4 years' time, the required return has increased by 4.5%. So in 4 years' time, your required rate of return is going to be 12% plus 4.5%. Okay. We always, when we are using the bond valuation formula, calculate the value for one bond. So your future value in your formula must always be the value for one bond. A lot of you use that total 525 as the future value. That it doesn't work that way. You have to calculate the value for one bond and then multiply that value by the number of bonds that you have got. What else here? Okay, so, and I realized when I was going through marking that in the lesson plan that I gave you, I actually made a mistake with this question where I said take 525 and divide it by the par value of the bonds to work out the number of bonds that he bought. So if any of the students that did do that, I gave you full marks for that part of the question because I had told you to do that. But what we actually had to do was calculate the value of the bond at the start of the 20 years, then take the 525,000, divide it by that bond value, which will then tell us how many bonds he could purchase when the bond was first issued. I'm sorry about that, but I didn't have the memo when we were NSS, so yeah, I just had a bit of a wobbly with that one, not thinking properly. And then you had to then work out a second value for the bond using the information of 16 years remaining till the maturity of the bond and the required rate of return now having increased by 4.5%. And then use the second value you would have multiplied by the number of bonds that he owned and then compared that amount to the 400,000 that he was hoping to raise by the sale of the bonds in order to pay off his mortgage bond. Okay, so your calculations were basically three. What was the value of the bond at the start of the 20 years? Then work out how many bonds he purchased. What was the value of the bond at the end of the 4 years? Work out what value he could raise by the sale of those bonds and compare that to the 400,000. Okay, I'll go to the questions now. Let me just go to the workings so that you can follow, we can follow those on screen as well. Let me just have, sorry, I've just got to flip backwards to, oh, hi, Norman. Okay, we'll have a look in a second and see how that compared. I'm good, thank you, Norman. And I do remember, Norman, you did very well in your assignment too. You'll see when the marks are released. But yeah, a lot of you guys, again, did exceptionally well. I've been super happy with this group. You guys have worked really hard and really there's some very good marks that have that we've seen. Okay, so if step number one, if we want to call it that, is the calculation of the price of the bond 4 years ago or at the issue of the bond. So the future value of the bond is always going to be the face value of the bond, the 5,000. N, the number of years, is going to be 20 years to maturity multiplied by 2, because remember the bond's coupon rate is going to be paid twice per annum. Interest compounds twice. So whenever that happens, we have to take N times M and R divided by M. Then for your PMT, you have to, the PMT is always, again, the face value of the bond multiplied by the coupon rate, which in this case was 16%. And then because the coupon was paid biannually, 16% is the annual rate, so 16% per annum paid in 2 installments. So you had to take 5,000 multiplied by 16% divided by 2. So your PMT was 400. So the person would receive 400 Rand twice a year. Then your value for R or I in terms of the interest rate, they said it is 3/4 of the coupon rate. So 16% being the coupon rate multiplied by 3/4 or times 0.75 and then divided by 2, again, because we have to take R divided by M. And M in this case equals 2 because the coupon was paid twice a year. comp PV. This is, by the way, they've only given in the memo the financial calculator version. But if you use, a lot of you use the formula, which is perfectly correct. All I do then is I look to see that you've used these correct values wherever these values had to be inserted into the formula. And then you would have got the marks. Okay, so the value that we would have paid for one bond when the bond was issued would have been 6,504.63. So we then had to take our 525,000 Rand that we had available to invest, divide that by 6,504.63 to work out how many bonds could we purchase, which was 81. Okay, so for our 525,000 Rand, we could have purchased 81 bonds at a market price of 6,504, because this is basically what we're calculating here is what is the market price of the bond, which is then, they are assuming that's what we paid. And that was where I should have realized that that we're not paying par value for the bond, we would have to pay the market price for the bond. I just wish that also had been a bit clearer in the question. And then after doing that, we had to then say, okay, the price of the bonds today, so today being after the 4 years, the future value is still going to be 5,000 because the maturity value of the bond does not change. N is now going to be 32 because there are now only 16 years left to maturity. So N times M, 16 times 2 is 32. PMT does not change because the amount that you are paid interest on the bond is going to be the same throughout all 20 years, regardless of anything else that happens. So that is still 400. And our required rate of return has now increased by 4.5%. So coupon rate times 3/4 plus 4.5% and then divided by 2. So 8.25. And then again, comp PV. So the bond is now has a market value of 4,860.47. And remember, now we're going to sell them. So now we have to say I've got 81 bonds that I purchased 4 years ago. I'm going to sell them for 4,860.47 because that's their current market value, which means I would be able to raise 393,698.07. And then for the final marks, you then had to compare the amount of money that you could raise by selling your bonds to the 400,000 that you were hoping to settle your mortgage bond with. And you had to state, no, he would not be able to settle his full mortgage bond because he would have a shortfall of 630,193, showing the values and and your calculation as well. Okay, so let's just take a look at that quickly. Step number 1, calculate the price of the bond 4 years ago when there were still 20 years left to maturity and the required rate of return was only 3/4 of the coupon rate. Step number 2, calculate the number of bonds that you could purchase with your 525,000 at that market price. Step number 3, calculate what you could sell your bonds for today. In other words, what the current market value was. Step number 4, what are your total proceeds for all of your bonds that you could raise? And then step number 5, make your decision and your comment as to would he be able to settle the mortgage bond or not. So there were quite a few students that did get all 25 marks. Remember, because I had said in that lesson plan that the number of bonds is going to be 525 divided by the 5,000. If you used that calculation in your answer. I gave you this section here was worth 8 marks. This here was worth 2 marks. I gave you those 8 marks and those 2 marks. So you wouldn't have lost any marks because of my mistake. I think if I remember correctly, this section here was worth 10 marks. This was worth 3 marks and this was worth 2 marks. So you had to get all of these steps and sections of the question correct in order to be able to get the full 25 marks for that question. Okay, so this question 4 was a really good application question in scenario problem that we are faced with. What are the steps that I've got to follow in doing calculations in order to be able to answer, to solve my problem? Okay, guys, so as I've said before, you know I'm not allowed to upload memos to more resources, so you'll only be able to access it here in this recording. And as you can see, wow, in this particular memo, there were quite a lot of errors that I had to get corrected. So if we uploaded memos, you guys would be thoroughly confused where there were these mistakes. And remember, this one also was an error. So that's why going through it with you on the screen like this helps you to understand what you should have done and where the common mistakes are that students made. Okay, so that's just a quick flash through of the assignment. And again, I hope it's helped you to understand the section of the work better, and also very much to get the idea of what these the formats and layouts of your answers need to look like for you guys to get the maximum amount of marks. Okay, guys, so anybody got any questions? Any questions that weren't answered on your second assignment? Nothing specific. Okay, guys, then in order not to keep you too much longer, I'm going to finish the recording. I'm just trying to think, what time did we start? Oh, actually, we haven't been too long. I don't like to keep you guys too long because I know you've got loads of things to do. So I'm going to finish the recording here, and then I will upload this so you guys will have access to it. And